Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com with this month's episode of the Brewers Council. Now, the Brewers Council is something that I offer my patrons at a certain tier that I will review a deck of their choice and give my feedback. One of the things that I receive by far the most requests on Twitter, on Facebook, on my email is, can you review a deck? I don't have time to review every deck, so I know this is a little bit, might sound greedy to some people, but time is money, so therefore this Patreon tier, I will guarantee that I will review a deck. And I actually have fun doing these, but again, I just do not have time to look at every submission every day that that you should see all the some weird places that all get submission. When I used to do Puka Trade, for example, people would message me on Puka Trade to review their deck, and I just do not have the time. So anyway, Tom's the only one that's really hit me up on this offer. This is the second month that we're going to review one of Tom's decks. This is going to be Breya, Ethereum Shaper, and he asked for me to just optimize his deck as much as possible. Now, Breya is a tough commander to build, not because it's a lot of things don't synergize with Breya. It's the exact opposite. There are way too many things that could go in a Breya deck. So a lot of these choices that Tom has included, I can't really argue against. They're fine choices. I have a particular way that I build Breya. I personally have never played her in Commander, but I've helped build, I would say, 3 or 4 decks here at the shop for the multitude of Breya players. Now, Breya is the second most played Commander. It might have actually just leapfrogged to the #1. I'll have to check the stats again. Usually it is the latest Commanders are going to be the most popular because unlike the rest of Magic, which is pretty much stagnant, like Modern and Standard, Commander is just still growing by leaps and bounds. So there are so many Breya decks out there on the internet, and if you have played Commander recently, I'm sure that you have played against this Commander. Now, this commander can be very, very fun to build with. It could also be extremely degenerate. It's one of the best just play out-of-the-box commanders in a long time. If it's arguably probably the best that you can just play outside the box. I did like the green, the mono green and the mono red from 2 years back. I thought those were very powerful. But I think Breya is even better as far as just out-of-the-box play and then find some cheap upgrades, with Kaladesh being one of the most recent sets having a lot of upgrades to Breya. So we're going to go down Tom's list here. I'm going to review a little bit of the choices and give my insight on whether or not I feel like these should be in the deck or if there's better replacements. So this, what you see on the screen, minus some of the lands, is Tom's list. So the first column here is, so there's not 111 cards in there. There's other cards I've added that we'll talk about why I'm going to try to make arguments whether they should be in the deck or whether there's options to be included. So on the first column here is just kind of the mana, the ramp here. Chief Engineer and Vidalcan Engineer are fine. These are both really good cards to cast. Vidalcan Engineer is really good because it can get you 2 mana of any one color. That's, I swear there was one out of another set. No, that just adds 2 colorless. Out of Fate Reforged or Cons, one of the 2 that added towards artifacts. But this one, Vidalcan Engineer, gets a little bit weird with Breya, but it can ramp up to some of your other cards and add colored mana to spend for artifacts, which is very key because a lot of these older cards that are artifacts and colored can be a little bit difficult to cast, especially in a 4-color deck. So to help with that, of course, is going to be the Chromatic Lantern, which can filter all of your lands to add any mana of any color to mana pool. And there's other ways in the mana. The mana base didn't include Tom's mana base, but it was pretty sufficient at getting the job done by creating colored mana. So the Chief Engineer is really good too because it has a lot of synergy with Breya herself because it gives all artifacts Convoke. Breya is going to put out 2 Thopters, so Breya becomes a ramp spell herself with the Chief Engineer. The Blinkmoth Urn is nice because at the beginning of each pre-combat main phase, you add a mana for each artifact they control. This does help your opponent, so keep that in mind. But when you're ready to kind of go off, this is going to add a lot of mana on that key turn. Then the Crackline Ironworks and the Ashnod's Altar are just busted. If you've ever played Breya, this is going to be one of your combo pieces, and we'll talk about that in a second. Everflowing Chalice, I'm not sure if I quite like Everflowing Chalice here, just because the amount of colored mana that you do need. I think we're really good at adding colorless mana, and kicking into this for like 6, add something that add 3 mana to your mana pool. I'd almost rather just have like a Hedron Archive at this point than an Everflowing Chalice. The Commander Sphere is fine. It can add any mana to your mana pool, and it's got the ability to sacrifice it to draw a card. And the way that Tom has built this, there is a huge element of the recursion of recurring artifacts. So I think that's a great choice. Of course, the Soul Ring is going to be in here. 1 Signet, that was kind of interesting. There was just the Dimir. I'd have to look at the mana base for the reasons why. It does seem to be that red and white are the most color. Well, there's blue in here too, a lot of blue. Yeah, but black does seem to be the least amount used. So I think that swapping this over to a different signet, maybe an Izzet Signet would be, or Azorius Signet might be the right choice if you're just going to include one. The lands are Academy Ruins, Inventor's Fair, and Rogue's Passage, Destro's Lighthouse. These two I don't think are that necessary. I do understand there is an element of looting and then recurring it back. We'll get to those cards in a second. But Rogue's Passage, there's not a lot of cards that I think really have like one-shotting your opponent capability. It's a lot of work to get there, and so I think Rogue's Passage can be replaced with a better utility land, but that's just my opinion there. So we have what I call flex spots here now on the next column with Venture's Journal. No maximum hand size is quite significant. There was also the Reliquary Tower, I believe, in the mana base, but I just did include all the usual suspects for commander decks. Venture's Journal will gain some life at the beginning of upkeep. It's fine. I usually tend not to play these type of cards in my commander because more often than not, they end up just being kind of a wasted slot. But I don't argue against, I don't know the particular meta that's being played, if there's a lot of balance and things like that where you need a maximum hand size. Breya does have a lot of ways to draw a lot of cards, but it also has a lot of ways to get a lot of mana to cast those on the same turn. We have the Soul of New Phyrexia, which is fine. It can definitely be a really good combo with a few cards that wipe the board or give your permanents indestructible so that they can't be wiped. I think it's a fine slot in this particular deck. Unwinding Clock is extremely good because it untaps all artifacts you control during each other's player's untap step, so it almost gives you more turns to at least activate abilities. So we'll be looking at a lot of creatures like the Eldrazi Displacer and Deadeye Navigator that can really go bananas with the Unwinding Clock. The Hammer of Perforos is fine. It's a way to give your cards haste. I'm not sure there's any cards that particularly have to have haste in this deck, but we'll wait and see if there's a lot of synergy for it. But it's again, this is a slot that could easily be replaced in my opinion. Voltaic Key's fine because it can untap target artifact. It's great of untapping I think that one of the cards that I think is missing in here is the Lotus, the one that has 3 mana. I can't think of the name in a minute. The 5 mana artifact that taps to add 3 mana. That's what's really good with like Voltaic Key as a way to generate those colored mana. In fact, I think that's a way better slot than the Everflowing Chalice, because I know you can cast Everflowing Chalice for 2, but a lot of times you want either 4 or 6, and by that point, the Gilded Lotus, that's the card I'm thinking of. I think Gilded Lotus is a better slot than the Everflowing Chalice. So then we have the Sidri Galvanic Genius, which can give your creatures lifelink and death touch, which has combos in cards that weren't really included in here, like the Walking Ballista and the Triskelion. Those are what the Sidri's usually comboed with. So in this particular deck, I didn't see a lot of value off giving things death touch. It does give Breya death touch, but Breya doesn't do damage to creatures. It does in the form of -4, -4. I found that out the hard way when I just assumed that I could also do damage to creatures. And let's just pull up Breya here when I had equipment equipped to Breya in a competitive match, and yeah, it didn't quite work the way I wanted it to. So yeah, I think the Sidri could definitely go with those type of Walking Ballista type cards, but in this deck, there's just not a lot that works with the card. So then we have what I call just the pure value of being able to flicker things back or just get a lot of value out of specific slots. So we have the Mirror-Smith. This is a card that I really think should be cut. I don't think you get a lot of value out of the Mirror-Smith because the deck is already pretty mana hungry. So it wants to having to pay another mana to create a 1/1 artifact creature, I think is a little too taxing, and there's better ways to do this than the Mirror-Smith. So I suggest this could be cut for a better slot when it's also very vulnerable. It's a 2/1. It's not an artifact, so a lot of the recursion this deck is not going to get it back. In my opinion, it's a wasted slot. Master Transmuter is definitely a key card in this. A lot of the Breya decks will have Master Transmuter because you can return an artifact, meaning that some of the artifacts, even Breya, has an ETB effect. So if you put it back in your hand and then cast it again, you're going to get the ETB all over again. And you can cheat in cards like the, we're getting to some of those higher mana cards. What's the 9 mana? It is definitely in this deck. Why didn't I put it in there? The 9 mana, all your cards get indestructible. Oh, there it is, Darksteel Forge. Yeah, so that's one of the key cards with Master Transmuter, is like the Darksteel Forge or some of these higher casting cost artifacts. So it's definitely fine choice. It's also an artifact, so it can be cheated in or recurred or tutored with a lot of the options here. Nim's Death Mantle is probably the key card for Breya. Any deck that does not run Nim's Death Mantle with Breya is a grievous sin, because it does create an infinite combo with the Crackling Ironworks and the Ashnod's Altar. So if Breya, for example, puts in 2 Thopters, you sack them both, or you sack all of them, and it's 6 mana, put the Breya back on the Nim's Death Mantle, rinse and repeat. You're up 2 mana each time, and then if you have some sort of artifact in here or a creature that has some sort of trigger off of an artifact dying, then you definitely get all those triggers and you can just win the game. So it's a huge combo piece. Marvel is okay. I mean, Marvel does kind of combo with some of these type cards, because every time something dies you get an energy, but I think there's better ways to really filter through your deck. It's fine though. I'm not against Aetherworks Marvel. It's kind of a awkward slot in my opinion. Steel Overseer, I think there's better ways to do this, and a lot of the times Breya doesn't try to go the go-wide strategy. I think if you're running like the Sharding Sphinx, this would be pretty good with Steel Overseer, or the like Mirror Battlesphere, or I'm thinking of some other cards that just put out a ton of artifact creatures like Hangerback Walker. Then Steel Overseer would definitely be a better, like a more synergistic slot. But looking at this list, there's not a lot of synergy with the Steel Overseer, and I think it's definitely another card that could get the, you could chop for something that has a higher impact card. So the Thopter Spy Network, I think, is a mistake. I do not like Thopter Spy Network in most Commander decks. I just don't think it's on the power level that it wants to be. It has to wait an entire turn to get your first 1/1, and then if 1 or more artifact creatures deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. That's just a one-time trigger, I believe. Yeah, I guess for multiple, does it trigger off multiple opponents? I know that in 1 versus 1, it only triggers one time no matter how many artifacts hit the player. So I think there's better ways to both draw cards and generate Thopter artifact creature tokens. Plus it's an enchantment, so it doesn't synergize with a lot of things in this deck. I think it could easily be chopped for something better. Efficient Construction, whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature. It's kind of on the same par as the Mirrorsmith. This one does not cause any sort of taxing, like you don't have to pay anything for this ability to activate. But again, I just think there's a few better ways to generate the Thopter creature tokens. There is some loops in here with casting and returning, casting and returning, casting and returning that are okay, but the Deadeye Navigator and the Eldrazi Displacer flicker. They don't cast. So it's kind of a non-bow with a lot of cards in this deck, and I just don't think it's quite on the power level that this deck wants if you compare it to the other cards in this list. The Displacer and the Deadeye Navigator are really strong, as generating the colorless mana for the Eldrazi Displacer is quite easy. There are definitely multiple infinite combos in this deck with the Eldrazi Displacer, with the Ashnod's Altar and the Crackling Ironworks. And Deadeye Navigator is also really good. They also synergize with the Commander herself. Usually when I look at cards, it's kind of one of my requirements for Commander that it synergizes with the Commander. Otherwise, why are we playing Commander? Why don't we just play like Singleton or Legacy? But anyway, that's just my opinion there. So I do love the Eldrazi Displacer and the Deadeye Navigator for these particular flex spots here. So here are the win cons of the deck. I guess I put the Darksteel Forge in this category because it gives everything indestructible, and then he's become too much walled up monstrosity here with all of the artifacts. The Filigree Angel, oh, these are a payoff slot is what I'm saying. So once you get established, they pay off. The Filigree Angel, when it enters the battlefield, gain 3 life for each artifact you control. It does cost 8 mana. So to me, I've never really liked this card. It is okay when you start recurring it or flickering it because it's insanely hard for your opponents to... I know he does say that there's a lot of Perforos in his particular meta, so that's fine. It's absolutely fine for this particular slot. I think that... You know what? Aetherworks Marvel, I think, is supposed to be Aetherworks Reservoir. Whoops. I think this is supposed to be the Reservoir here. So Reservoir is another way to gain life, and once you get up to enough life total... Yeah, let me check the list really quickly here to see which Aetherworks was the... was it Marvel? Yes, this is supposed to be Aetherworks Reservoir, so I apologize for that. So, put in the wrong one. And I can't spell Reservoir. Okay, still can't spell it. So, anywho, let me find the particular spelling to the Reser. There we go. So this, okay, so this is another win con, because whenever you cast a spell, you gain a life, and once you're up to 50 life. So the Filigree Angel, I guess, is a way to have the Reservoir, which is fine. This is, win cons are win cons. Usually they don't have to be too tricky. If this is the one you're comfortable playing with, then I say go for it. The Combustible Gearhook can still be a nice little flicker and recursion type strategy, especially if an opponent is low life. They're going to have to give you the cards, and then you're going to have a pretty amazing card draw with it. There are also some very high converted mana cost cards in this particular deck, so if they choose to put them in their graveyard, they could take a lot of damage. Personally, I don't think the card fits too well. I'd rather have like a more guaranteed. I don't like cards that give your opponent the option, but it's definitely a fine choice. The Magister Sphinx, this one is pretty popular in the Breya archetypes. I personally, it's okay, because you can really combo off with Breya, so you put someone's life total at 10, and no matter what their life total was, you then only have to sacrifice 4 creatures, and then it does the 12 damage necessary to kill your opponent, and that also puts you in range for one-shotting in other ways. So it's a decent little card, but it's not the way I like to play Breya. But it's fine. Hellkite Tyrant is another very popular card because you're running a ton of Thopter tokens and other things and artifact lands and things like that. So it's very easy to have this alternate win con through the Hellkite Tyrant. And Throne of the God Pharaoh does have some synergies with like the Chief Engineer, because you can then convoke things out and then have a bunch of tapped creatures. But in my opinion, this one doesn't have enough synergy with tapped creatures to really want it in the deck. Alright, so then Tutors and card draw. The Enlightened Tutor's fine, puts a card on top of your either an artifact or enchantment. There aren't that many enchantments after the ones that I suggested cutting, so there might be a better slot for this, like Fabricate, for example. Trophy and Trinket Mage are very good in this deck. The main reason Trophy Mage is it can go get the Ashnod's Altar, and that is a really like necessary evil of the deck for the Ashnod's Altar combo. Really makes your deck start running on all gears. So I do like the Trophy Mage. Looking at the list, so there isn't a lot of other targets to grab. There's like a Chromatic Lantern and a Commander Sphere. Usually there's like Burnished Hearts that people like to grab with Trophy Mage. But are we looking at any? Are there any artifact creatures that can grab? I'm not seeing too many. So I mean that might be a suggestion to add a few more targets for the Trophy Mages, especially when you have Eldrazi Displacer and Deadeye Navigator as a way to kind of abuse that. The Trinket Mage can go get all artifact lands. It can also go get Soul Ring, and it can also get Skull Clamp. So I'm definitely in favor of the Trinket Mage. Other cards people have put in there before too, like a Needle just to shut down people, but that's definitely not necessary. The Sphinx Summoner is really good here because when it enters battlefield, you search for an artifact creature and put it in your hand. So it's a great tutor. It's something to be flickered and recurred. I think this is pretty much a staple in Breya. So is Skull Clamp, just it synergizes with Breya and all the other 1/1 Thopter tokens. This one is also pretty much a staple, as it gives all your artifacts hexproof, way to kind of protect Breya. And then if you usually end up being the person with the highest converted mana cost artifacts, so you'd be drawing a card. Simulacrum as well is pretty staple for most Breya decks, especially flickering and recurring. It's a great way to ramp up and get a lot of value off of if there's a special way to bring it back from the graveyard. Same thing with Vedalken Archmage. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, draw a card. And the Strix is a great, another ETB effect, and it also gives you a nice little roadblock. Fumigate in here, I think there's a few better ways. I think this is still meta choice because the Fumigate, he has told me Perforos is a big deal. This is a way to gain life. Sure, not against that. The Concussive Bolt, though, I think is a very awkward piece in this particular deck. As a Concussive Bolt, just dealing 4 damage to a player, doesn't do a lot, and then they can't block. I'm not seeing a lot of ways you want to attack with this deck, with what I'm seeing here. Yes, you can go really wide with a lot of 1/1 Thopters, and maybe that's where the Steel Overseer was. But utilize your commander as the win con. The damage directly to the face, yes, they might have ways to have hexproof and things like that, but I think that's a better way than really relying on Concussive Bolt. Crush the Tentacles and Cyclonic Rift are fine because they're great ways to really to kind of reset the board, return things back with all the ETB effects. That's definitely a good options. Opposition. This is another really good card that I think that every Breya deck should have in it. And as it's a great way to really lock down opponents once you get a lot of the Thopter tokens out. So again, I think instead of using your Thopters to attack, this is where you want to be utilizing your Thopters as a renewable resource and then as a win con with opposition. So opposition is insanely good. Untap at their untap upkeep, then you tap down all their lands again. And really oppressive card, really annoying card to play against. The Seal of Cleansing is fine. Maybe Torpor Orb's a thing, so that's why Seal of Cleansing's in here. Enlightened Tutor can grab it as well. You can sacrifice to destroy an artifact or enchantment. So yeah, Torpor Orb probably is a problem, so I'm okay with Seal of Cleansing being in here. And I think this is why the Ethersworn Adjudicator is in here as well, as this is a nice way to destroy a creature or enchantment. I guess it can't do an artifact though, can it? So, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely good. Once you have enough mana, this is where you think you need the Gilded Lotus in here to really help with these type of cards. Urtai the Corrupted, sacrifice a creature, enchantment, counter target spell, synergizes amazingly well with Breya and other ways that make Thopters. And the Dispeller's Capsule is another way to get around the Torpor Orb. Now, here is like another aspect of the Breya that a lot of people do run, which is the kind of recurring from your graveyard. So, Trash for Treasure is fine. So, you sacrifice an artifact, return an artifact back from your graveyard to battlefield. It's really, really powerful with Thopter tokens and other cards that want to be sacrificed, like the Solemn Simulacrum. The Scrap Mastery is the Living End version or Living Death version for artifacts. So, you swap. This one's kind of awkward. If you have a lot of cards in the graveyard, people utilize this card more with a self-mill strategy, like the Duretti Scrap Savant type strategy, or other just looting type abilities. So I'm not sure if it fits that great in this particular deck. It also exiles, so all of your things that have die effects won't trigger off of this. Might not be that big of a deal. Ancient Excavation, I know, does synergize with the Scrap Mastery, but I think there's better ways to do this, to draw cards and then discard that many cards. It's fine, though, especially if it's instant speed. If you have the Adventurer's Journal and a ton of cards, this is a great way to get through a lot of your cards and find your pieces. Forbid is okay because you can just, again, you can discard cards and then counter spells and then get stuff back, but I think it's trying too hard. It doesn't have enough of these. You're going to not see all of these in the same game over and over. And either want to go all in on this strategy. Like, this is not even half Cs. This is like quarter Cs into this strategy. And it's most games, I don't think you're going to see enough synergies for this to be worthwhile. Again, with the Faith's Reward, you can go off on like a huge Ashnod's Altar combo. But I'd rather rely on other ways to do that. Open the Vault, same thing. It's fine. Open the Vaults is a little more powerful because you're going to have most of the artifacts and some of these enchantments like Seal of Cleansing and Dispeller's Capsule. So I'm not against the Open the Vaults. And Faith's Reward's fine choice too. This is a card I do not like, the Silas, Ren Seeker Adept, or Silas. I think this is too tough to make it worthwhile. I'd rather have something with an ETB effect do this, rather than have to worry about actually hitting your opponent. Powerful Commander, not very good, not as a... Yeah, not, unless you build around it. Shroom is this is a typical card because, there you go, this enters the battlefield and you get an artifact card back from your graveyard to battlefield. Much better of a choice. Hannah's Ship Navigator, same thing. Return an artifact or enchantment card back from your graveyard to your hand. That is a lot more reliable of doing kind of the very similar thing. Same thing with Trading Post. You have a Thopters at your disposal to get cards back. So I like this package a lot better than, like, say, this package. Whip of Erebos I do not like because I don't think any one of your artifacts want to be exiled or your creatures want to be exiled. So I'd rather use your graveyard as a renewable resource rather than it's okay, it gives things lifelink, but I would suggest against the Whip of Erebos. Crucible of Worlds, yes, if there's land destructions. Yes, if you're going a self-mill strategy, I can see the merit of running Crucible of Worlds, but unless your meta is really dependent on that, or has Armageddons and things like that, I'm not sure Crucible needs to be in here. And then is the Planeswalker slot. Chandra's kind of out of place. Yes, it can ramp up. Yes, it can deal damage. Yes, it can be a win con. But I think there's better Planeswalkers for this slot, especially the artifact Planeswalkers. Nahiri is good though, because I think that it can go find as soon as you get to your -8. It can go get some of your win cons. So I'm perfectly okay with Nahiri. I think it's a great card. I know it does have this discard as well to fill up the graveyard kind of aspect for the Fate's Reward, or not the Fate's Reward, doesn't with Open the Vaults and the Mastery. Duretti's fine. It's more looting. It's more sacrifice a Thopter, get something back. Duretti is great for that. And Liliana typically is in most black decks. In this particular deck, I think there's better ways to do it, though. Liliana's great in mono black where you don't have as many options. But and put all creature cards, it's a very, very typical commander or planeswalker to be played in commander. I'm not for or against the Liliana. So that's kind of my overview of the deck. Now, the second part of this question is, what can you do better to Breya? Breya is an insane commander with the degenerate things you can do with her. So on to like the first slot that I think is recurring things back from the graveyard that works with the Ashnod Altar. It also gives you some more options for the Trophy Mage to go grab. And this is like the Phyrexian Metamorph is just so versatile. And I like this because it's always going to be the best thing on the board. It's going to copy Gilded Lotuses, for example, or Paradox Engines, or any creature that is just busted. Phyrexian Metamorph is going to give you that artifact or creature. So in my opinion, it's a must include. You can get a lot of value off of it by flickering it or returning it back from your graveyard, and for any sort of enter the battlefield trigger. So Phyrexian Metamorph is a must in Breya. Mirror Retriever, Scrap Trawler, Junk Driver, Workshop Assistant, and Sanctum Gargoyle are all really cool too because they have the die effects and they can loop pretty well with like Crack Clan Ironworks. A lot of times you need like Ethereum Sculptor or another way to reduce the mana cost of artifacts that you're going to be like casting from your hand. But I mean, there's plenty of those. I think there's one out of Kaladesh. There's the Ethereum Sculptor. Isn't there one back in the day too that does reduce the cost? I mean, you still have your Convoke cards too that can work with this to create these infinite loops. And then you do need to have a payoff like a die ability, and we'll get to that in a second. So the Mirror Retriever, Scrap Trawler, Junk Diver, Workshop Assistant, Sanctum Gargoyle, these are much better, much better in my opinion than relying on Silas Wren. Panharmonica seems to be a duh in this just because it has so much synergy with Breya. And I think that it has a lot of synergy with a ton of other cards that you've already have included in this deck. And then there are also some options that I think you should include that will work well with Panharmonicon. Grand Architect's also another great way to really ramp up, so you can tap an untap blue creature. Remember, Breya's Thopters are blue. They're blue Thopters. So let's just look at Breya real quick. So it puts 2 1/1 blue Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. So there's just a lot of synergy with Grand Architect, allowing your blue Thopters as well as Breya to then have the ability to ramp. I think Grand Architect wants to be in that slot for ramp. The Duplicate and Noxious Gearhulk are great kind of crowd control. They're great ways of just killing off particular cards and gaining you life. So instead of really relying on the Sphinx to gain a ton of life, maybe Noxious Gearhulk's a better thing to flicker. Duplicate is great too because it exiles, so it gets around like indestructible and then becomes a copy. So it's like kind of like the Phyrexian Metamorph here. It's easily tutored with a card called Treasure Mage 2 that we'll talk about in a second. And most of these cards in this slot are also with Treasure Mage. The Wormcoil engine is great with Ashnod's Altar. It leaves back 2 3/3s. So you put out a 6/6. It's a Death Touch Life Leader, huge roadblock, huge way to gain life. You combos off with Ashnod's Altar because you have 3, or the Nim's Death Mantle Ashnod's Altar. Because you have 3 artifacts, so you generate 6 mana. It's only 4 mana to rinse and repeat. And eventually you leave back a bunch of 3/3 lifelink or Death Touch worms, and you go infinite on that aspect. So I do like Wormcoil in this particular deck a lot. I think it fits very well with Breya. Mirror Battlesphere is the same thing. It just combos insanely well. It puts a ton of mirrors out. It gives you that kind of win con. It really does the most for this type of slot. For a 1 card, to have the Crack Clan and Ashnod's Altar type ability, this is your go-to card, the Mirror Battlesphere. It also can be tutored up with the Treasure Mage and gives you a lot more, with the card that we talked about earlier, that you return a card to put a card onto the battlefield. This is the perfect option for that. I do like Whirler Rogue, Pia and Chronolar, or Angel of Invention with other cards that kind of combo with the Ashnod's Altar and the Nim's Death Mantle. Because these, again, add 3 things for 1 and will give you 6 mana, and they also go infinite. Whirler Rogue is a better way than kind of the Rogue's Passage to give something unblockable. The P and Chronolar can then also be a win con to start sacrificing artifacts to do 2 damage. It's very similar to Breya, but it's also something that puts out 3 things for 1. And the Angel of Inventions will actually give all of your other creatures +1/+1, and it can do very similar things. So I do like these in a Breya deck. You don't have to run all of them, but I do suggest having a few of them, or unless you're just relying on the Treasure Mage grabbing, like the Mirror Battlesphere, maybe that's a better route to go. It's whatever you decide is fine. Mimic Vat, I think, is pretty powerful in this particular deck because a lot of your things do have ETB effects, and it's just something you can untap too. You have a lot of ways to untap with the Voltaic Key and some other cards, and so you can get multiple value out of the Mimic Vat. And very, very powerful effect. Works very well with all these cards above it. So you got to think of this sort of like the Eldrazi's Displace and the Deadeye Navigator. Alright, so as far as the tutors are concerned, here are some very, very powerful tutors. So the Treasure Mage absolutely wants to be in here. It's very good at getting particular win cons. And very good flicker effect. Definitely a must include. Fabricate 2 is really good because you can just search for any artifact, put it in your hand. Nothing, no ifs, buts, ors about it. Great. Reshape 2. Reshape says you sacrifice an artifact, get an artifact from your converted mana cost X or less and put it on the battlefield. Very, very great tutor. Most artifact decks that are running blue, of course, do have them. And the Kadaltha Forge Master is just insane with Breya because Breya already puts out 3. So just with Breya and the Kadaltha Forge Master, which also has the turn 4 into turn 5, can go get you a busted artifact, whether it be the Darksteel Forge, for example. And yes, you do have to either sacrifice your own Kadaltha Forge Master or Breya, but once that's out, you can start doing some very degenerate things. The Arkham Dagsson is one of the... This is basically a sin if you're playing Breya and do not run the Arkham Dagsson. So good. So you sacrifice an artifact creature, which, again, is going to be a Thopter token, and then go get a non-creature artifact. So there's your Forge again. There's your Paradox Engine. There's your Aetherflux Reservoir. Something like massive win con right there off the Arkham Dagsson. Whir of Inventions is also an instant speed improvise, so all of your Thopter tokens, all of your artifacts can help pay to go get a win con with your artifact cards and put it directly on the battlefield. Now for panic buttons, I like the Spine of Ishsaw because it's easy to get it back and then just start destroying permanents. It also is something you can tutor up with the Treasure Mage. It's also something like the Arkham Dagsson can go get. So Spine of Ishsaw, I think, wants to be in this deck. There's also the Nevenderal's Disc, which is the better panic button. It's something you can, after you have the Darksteel Forge, is really, really powerful because all of their stuff dies, your stuff does not. And there was also a white mana spell, too. There was a white... Oh, we're coming up to that. Okay. So I think those are better panic buttons than, like, Fumigate, for example. Alright, so then on to kind of win cons. The Marionette Master, I think, is the best win con for Breya because it allows whenever an artifact you control dies to do damage equal to Marionette Master's power. And usually if you fabricated, like if you put the tokens on, or the +1 counters on the Marionette Master, it's going to be 4 damage or 4 loss of life every time an artifact dies, which it doesn't take long once you have a combo established for this to basically go off. And why I like it better than like the Disciple of the Vault is it also combos with a lot of your pieces, like the Eldrazi Displacer, like the Deadeye Navigator. We also have Summoning Station, which is really good because whenever an artifact is put in your graveyard in the battlefield, you can untap it and put a 2/2. Yes, of course, these aren't artifacts, but you put out a ton of 2/2s that then can be sacked to the Astronaut's Altar. That's pretty good. I mean, if you're going down this route, probably even including Phyrexian Altar is good with like the Summoning Station. Another card that can be tutored with the Treasure Maze, can be cheated into play multiple ways. Pretty good card in this deck. As far as Planeswalker is concerned, all of the Tezerads are extremely powerful. Tezzeret Agent of Bolas can be a win con against one player very early. You just have to tick him up once, and he's ready just to gain a lot of life, have an opponent lose a lot of life. It can protect you by making a creature a 5/5, like your Darksteel Citadel can become a 5/5 indestructible card. But the best thing is just to every turn look at the top 5 cards of your library, and to me it's just better than Chandra in this slot. Tezzeret Master of Metal, just the intro deck card is very good too, because you reveal a card from the top of your library until you get an artifact card. Put it into your hand. Or target opponent loses life equal number of artifacts. So it's very similar to the other part. And then the -8 is gain control of our artifacts or creatures target opponent controls. That is pretty good in Commander. I think that's just as powerful as like the Liliana in that slot. The Tezzeret Agent or Tezzeret the Schemer is also good because it can start making these Ethereum cells that can sacrifice to add mana to your mana pool, which then trigger off everything else. It can be creature removal, and the emblem is pretty good too because at the beginning of your combat on each turn, target artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power times 5/5. This is the one that I like the least for this particular deck, but it's definitely an option. Tezzeret the Seeker is very powerful in this deck because it can tutor specific artifacts and put them directly on the battlefield. It can untap 2 artifacts, so if you're running cards like the Gilded Lotus, that's very powerful, or even like what we were talking about, the Mimic Vat, it's powerful. And it can be a better win con, I would say, than relying on the Steel Overseer. So I do like Tezzeret the Seeker here, and Duretti is just too good. The synergy with Breya and Duretti is just too good not to include. It's a very, very cheap Planeswalker. This starts to put out colorless construct artifact creatures very, very early, and then if you sacrifice an artifact, you can destroy an artifact or creature. That's a really good way to get rid of the Torpor Orb if you're worried about Torpor Orb. And the ultimate, of course, is really, really good too. Choose an artifact card in a graveyard. Choose an artifact card in a graveyard or artifact on the battlefield and create 3 tokens of it. Oh, that's insanity when you're targeting. There's so many artifacts that just goes busted with it. All right, so one of the very degenerate things that Breya can do. Breya has access to the Saheeli Felidar Guardian combo, and why I like this in Breya is both of these have so much synergy already with your deck. You already have so many ETB effects that the -2 to create a token is great. Make a token of a Wormcoil Engine, sure. At the end of turn, you have to exile. If you can sack it before then, it still gets its die effect. And of course, it's got the Felidar Guardian Cancer combo that can just go off. Felidar Guardian itself flickers any permanent you control, and then you get another use out of it. So it's a really good card to combo with like the Deadeye Navigator or the Eldrazi Displacer, because then it allows your ETB artifacts to also work. Then we have the Sword of the Meek Thopter Foundry combo. This one's actually really, really powerful because it gives you an outlet for Crackling Ironworks. I think that most Breya decks do use the Sword of the Meek Thopter Foundry combo. It's a lot of ways to gain a lot of life, create a lot of blue Thopter artifact creature tokens, again, that works with the Grand Architect. Time Sieve. This card went insanely up in value when Breya was spoiled, and I think it still costs a pretty penny because it's so easy to sacrifice 5 artifacts to take an extra turn after this one. You're going to take all the turns very quickly with this deck. You're going to create a scenario where you have all the turns for the rest of eternity. Unless that's your playgroup is as geared away from that, Time Sieve is very, very powerful. Scourglass. I like this card too because it has synergy with the Darksteel Forge. Well, actually no, because artifacts. Never mind. So it's a good panic button that doesn't kill your stuff, most of your stuff anyway. And the thing is, if you're running Scourglass, you probably want like Vedalken Orrery or Shimmermere, but you can also kind of War of Inventions this in, there's other ways to do that, to cheat it in before the end of your turn. And then on the beginning of your upkeep, you can then use the Scour Glass. So keep that in mind. There's other ways to do it besides the flashers. As far as last but not least is the lands. The lands I really like are Volrath's Stronghold and Buried Ruin. I just think that these are just better flex spots than like the Rogue's Passage. The Volrath's Stronghold can, if one of your particular creatures has died, this is a better way just to get it back on top of your library. And it's basically just a tutor as far as your graveyard is concerned. So I really like the Volrath's Stronghold, and I really like the Buried Alive. So that's kind of my 2 cents. I've gone way over time for this particular video. I was going to show you my deck that I'm going to be running in the Community Cup, but we'll do that on well, we'll just show it here. What am I at right at the moment? Nope, we're at 40 minutes. We're going to end this video right now. So if you're interested in the kind of Brewers Council, me doing a particular video for you, yes, this was very long-winded, but I hope that it's just an overall tutorial on how to play Breya. If there's any cards that I've obviously missed, put them in the comment section below. The thing about Breya, 4 colors, there are so many options. But I hope this will do well for you. I mean, I didn't create a deck list for you, but you can mix and match kind of the pieces that I've talked about. And yeah, so next video I'm going to show you, in honor of Tom being such a loyal patron, I am going to be in a Community Cup, or the Content Creators Cup. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. So I am going to be part of this monstrosity, the Content Creators Cup here, and it's the new 1 versus 1 Commander that is coming out on MTGO. I'm actually going to do a video about how I think this is really going to affect the MTGO market. And it might actually bleed over into Paper Magic. So really, really keep your eye open on 1 versus 1 Commander. Now that it's kind of got Wizards' attention and Wizards' support, this could be a real deal thing. So I am going to be playing Breya in honor of Tom. So I built a 1 versus 1 Breya competitive deck. And lo and behold, after I built it, I went and searched 1 versus 1 Commanders. And Breya actually is banned in one of the formats. And is really oppressive in one of the others, so didn't do that on purpose. Really just did this because it was this month's Brewers Council, and just in honor of Tom, I thought I'd showcase it and play it. So be looking for these videos. It's sponsored by They Said We Said and the Card Bazaar. So I'll be playing these scrubs here, and hopefully we beat them. I'll show you that deck tech either later on today or tomorrow, and then we'll talk about the kind of the impact I think that Commander 1 versus 1 is going to have on the MTGO and paper formats. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this deck tech. This has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.